Welcome to another episode of Raven Conversations. I'm Joe C. Mandel, the State Public Affairs Officer for the Washington National Guard. And today I'm joined by Lieutenant Colonel Heidi Leonard. She is one half of the Lieutenant Colonels Leonard, your
Leonard.
husband. Yep, Team Leonard, Ray Leonard. Love Ray. He's probably watching this video right now, too, to laugh at you a little bit.
Maybe.
Your girls are probably like, hey, look, there's Mom.
That's probably.
Yeah, that happens. My daughter does the same thing. Every time she hears the music, she's like, Dad. I'm like, oh. Yep. So treating them well.
Yeah, all of the Raven Conversation intros are very compelling.
Yeah. So, but she's not the reason you're here is to joke and laugh about this, but she's here to talk about kind of her Guard career, her Guard path, starting out enlisted, becoming an officer. You've gone both routes. You've been a full-timer as well as an M-dayer. Mm-hmm. You guys run a business. So you've kind of done a lot of stuff over your Guard career, and you're here kind of just to share that story with the folks at home.
That's correct.
So I'll give you a chance, Heidi, to introduce yourself and kind of give a quick background on yourself. Sure.
So my name is Lieutenant Colonel Heidi Leonard. I'm one of two. I enlisted in 1998 in the Washington Army National Guard. I was an intel analyst with the 81st Brigade before it was a Stryker Brigade, like back in the day.
When it was the
mechanized. It was
81st, I believe?
It was the 81st, HAC 81st.
Okay.
And it was heavy, separate, mechanized. When it had a general, the 81st Brigade used to have a general, and that's when I, like, kind of the era where I enlisted into the Guard. I was 17, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, got my mom's permission to enlist. Following that, I went to college, got a scholarship through the ROTC program, commissioned in 2004 as an aviation officer, so I'm qualified to pilot both Blackhawks and Chinooks, which are amazing. Mm-hmm. You know, that's really sexy stuff. And leading in after that, did a couple of deployments in OIF and Operation New Dawn, did 2 consecutive deployments, came back, had a couple company commands. I've worked full-time for the Joint Operations Center, really dug into a lot of the domestic operations that we have here, in Washington State. I dabbled a little bit in finance, working for the United States Property and Fiscal Office. And now I work full-time for the Director of Logistics. So I am the Senior Logistics Management Supervisor for the G4.
Yeah, so you've had kind of a breadth of a career, very much like myself, right? I started out enlisted. I was a combat engineer. Now I am a public affairs, military intelligence, information operations officer. So you've gone from one thing to kind of a path that led you to something different.
I think that a lot of people actually find that that's the case with the National Guard, primarily due to the force structure or just due to interests, right? So it's not like the active duty where you do the same thing, but you go different places. But in the Guard, you can go different places within the same state, but you're not necessarily going to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. And those opportunities to kind of provide additional breadth to your training and the opportunities that present themselves throughout your career just, I think, lead you to different places.
Yeah. So I always ask the question for anybody that comes on here, how did you learn about the Guard?
My recruiter sent me a letter in the mail. I mean, it was not even an impressive letter. There was no letterhead. It was basically just a simple letter said, hey, we're going to pay for your books. We're going to give you $700. We're going to pay for your books. And I was doing a running start at the time to pay for my tuition, but we had to still pay for the books. And so that was what I decided as a 17-year-old was the way to go, is I was going to get my 2-year degree. The state was going to pay for my 2-year degree before I got my diploma, and the Guard is going to pay for my books.
Yeah. And that was it.
That was it.
Just a basic letter in the mail.
Yeah, that's how it started.
Yeah. So what led you to join then? Just getting that letter, just knowing you were going to get education benefits, or
that was part of it. So I went to high school in a smaller town, and so the opportunities were a little bit limited. At the time, there were a lot of my peers that were going on missions, like religious missions, and they had a calling.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been particularly religious, but I've been, I believe in faith and in service. And I was like, well, people really should pay more attention to the United States, people are always going away for missions. Like, why wouldn't you focus on the United States, and why wouldn't you focus on serving in America, where you can be part of a community and, for lack of a better term, just make your foxhole better. So yeah. I kind of made a parallel in my mind between those two.
Yeah. So very similar. I came back from I was started enlisted. I came back from a MOB, where it sounds like you didn't MOB prior to becoming an officer.
That's correct.
What kind of led you down the path of becoming an officer?
I went to the University of Washington, so thankfully, because of the Running Start program, I was able to transfer into UW, and nobody stopped me. Like, it was just a thing. I could do it, and it was very empowering. But that walk up the hill, so you park down at Montrose. I don't know if you're familiar with the University of Washington campus, but the primary parking is down the hill. Like, it's almost at sea level, and then you have to hike it, like, up to the campus. And I was in really great shape. Like, that was the best shape that I've ever been in my life. But on my way to, to the classes that I needed to get to was the ROTC building. And they had this big banner on the side that basically said scholarships. So every day that I was walking up those stairs from the Montrose parking, that's what it was. It's like, scholarship! And I was like, well, I really had not planned on being an officer. So there was the scholarships. And then there was also my S2 of the brigade at the time was now Lieutenant Colonel retired Tim Woodard. He also played a huge role in also kind of sparking that flame and saying, Heidi, you need to be an officer. Like, yeah. The brigade was deploying for its first mobilization in 2004, 2005. And I had the company commander at the time for HHC had pulled me aside, and he said, well, you can just turn down the scholarship. You can give the money back. You can go as an E5 on this deployment, big money. And Colonel Woodard said, there's always going to be another conflict. You need to go be an officer. And I was like, I'll do that then.
Yeah.
Like, he was so convinced that he convinced me. And between that and the scholarship, a little bit of paperwork goes a long way.
Yeah. So probably the question I ask, aviators all the time is, why aviation? Why did you choose aviation as your branch?
Because that was the option, because I could. I did not grow up being like, oh my gosh, like, I want to fly. It's not this huge passion for me. It was a series of unlikely events that I basically pre-qualified myself, and the opportunity presented itself. So I would one day, at ROTC, I came into the ROTC building, and somebody said to me, hey, they're taking the AFAST, and the AFAST test was the flight aptitude test at the time. It's like, hey, they're having this afternoon. Like, if you take this test, then, you may have the opportunity to request branch aviation. So I was like, okay, I'll do that. That sounds cool. And then when we went to the leadership development camp a little bit later on, there was an opportunity just to go get physically qualified. And so I wasn't doing anything, just hanging out. And so I went with other cadets in order to get medically qualified. My arms are actually secretly too short. So same thing is, I saw a bunch of my peers that kind of looked like me, that were a little bit short, and they had like little short arms. And so that was the first time that I actually went to the flight facility 1 at Gray Airfield, is to do a reach test where you have to prove that your ergonomics are meet the standard to be a pilot. So the test was, you had to reach up and pull the backup hydraulic pump. It's like right over there. So that's what you had to do. And, that's when I met Roy Criswell, CW4, the late and legendary Roy Criswell, as well as, some of the other folks in aviation.
Yeah.
So it was just this series of things. I actually commissioned as a military intelligence officer, but I boarded as an aviation officer.
Oh, wow. So you had the opportunity to go both careers.
Well, nobody really has time for both. Well, yeah.
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 Could have done both. That makes my senior year heart a little jealous. So I was originally, I'm an intel officer. Mm-hmm. I originally sat there and thought, do I go aviation? That was one that I was thinking about too. And I ended up going intel. I had friends in intel at the time that were like, hey, I think you'd really enjoy this career. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. So,
yeah. I mean, who doesn't want to be a pilot, right? That was the other thing. It's like, well, who wouldn't want to do that? And frankly, at the time, I mean, it was the early 2000s, and that's when the women that were early lieutenants in the 80s and in the 90s were growing up. That's when all of them started to have the opportunity to be considered for general. Mm-hmm. So the most of the female generals that I saw, if they weren't in a specific branch like JAG or medical or something like that, they were military intelligence or they were aviation. Aviation, of course, because it was the only combat arms branch that was open to women.
Yeah. So kind of talk about growing up through aviation. Who were some of those mentors? Kind of talk about just your experience there as a young officer.
Oh, that is, that's a tough one. So when I went into aviation, I was very passionate. So I told you, I joined at 17, I'm going to go do this. This is my plan. I'm going to go execute. And this is just how it's going to be. Right. So once I got to aviation after completing flight school, is that there was a bunch of us that were also, very hard charging. And there was a lot of competition that I felt was, a little detrimental. So when I got to aviation, some of the mentors that really helped me were some of the female NCOs that were around. So the late Janie Sutton, for instance. I had my first command, General Doherty, as a brigadier general, actually, entrusted me with my first company command, where now Command Sergeant Major Dana Trakel was my readiness NCO. So I was able to kind of supplement mentorship with a lot of very strong NCO mentors, honestly. There were others such as Colonel Caparici, who is now CW2 Dave Caparici. Of course, I worked both full-time and part-time with the Daniel Houston Dent, and he was just coming into the organization as an AGR, so he was the AO. So there isn't anybody that is not inspired by that man. So I think it would be remiss not to mention that individual. But other than that, it's definitely interesting. It's definitely very interesting. So I ended up being the first flight company commander female flight company commander of the Chinook Company. And nobody really gives you an award for being first. And if you are growing up in the Guard and you make a mistake, that will stick with you, right? So I'm very passionate. I'm young. I'm growing up in the Guard, and I have this bright and burning passion to drive the organization to success. And my idea of success was not necessarily everybody's idea of success. And so that cognitive disconnect kind of led me to explore other opportunities after that command. And that's kind of what led me into logistics and to other areas that are DOMOPS heavy. I was very fortunate to be involved in the planning for the Winter Olympics, for instance, in 2010. I helped establish the Homeland Response Force and served with the Homeland Response Force, and I was over at Fairchild Air Force Base for a while, where I met one of the other individuals that you featured on Raven Conversations. So now Master Sergeant, Aaron Reese. Yep. I had the privilege of reading him his oath of reenlistment, in a UH-72 Lakota airframe over the Grand Coulee Dam on a training mission. Yep. So, I mean, the environment with aviation, I felt, was not necessarily a fit for me. but that doesn't mean that it isn't a fit for anybody.
Yeah.
But I would never have had the opportunity to learn if I didn't have the necessity to do so.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned that's the guard, right? I mean,
that's the guard.
You can start one place, and you can ultimately kind of shift your career where your interests lie too.
Yeah.
And you kind of already brought into my next question, but you kind of brought it even more full circle than I probably could have. You went from an aviation where you deployed twice in a combat theater to shifting into logistics and being more focused on the domestic operations piece. Kind of talk about that shift. Why, you've gone from a combat now to let's focus on the dom ops, which some people don't want to make that shift. Why was that shift something you were interested in making? And ultimately, I think you're fantastic at it. So, and not to brag or anything, but I think you've done a good job in being a logistics person during domestic operations.
I appreciate that. Honestly, I was looking for a mentor. I was looking for an advocate. I was looking for that next step that would provide fulfillment of service, right? So I had gone and done things as a young person that I would never have expected to do, right? So once you get there, like, oh, you have arrived. Like, you're a captain, you're a pilot, you're all these things, you're empowered. But at the end of the day, what does it mean? Like, what does that mean to you? Like, what is your why? What is your purpose, right? Yep. And so when I found out, or when I kind of started thinking about, okay, well, now what? What's my next 3 to 5 year plan, right? Because you should have a plan, right? But so what's the plan? And so I started asking myself, well, why? Like, why do I continue to serve? Because I was at probably about 15 years of service at that point. And so had to really dig deep and think about, well, as I started having children, it's like, well, this is hard. Like there's very limited aft cyclic, if you're 9 months pregnant, right? Let alone to have 3 in 5 years. Yeah. So that was one of the things that also kind of led to that decision for me is, what is my why is, I was very interested in domestic operations because I worked full time at the Joint Operations Center when I was also in aviation. So I had that exposure that allowed for that transition. And then I found a mentor, in Lieutenant Colonel retired Pete Hudspeth that really allowed me to be that hard charger again, to come up with those ideas that maybe had not been broached before. Like one of the things that we came up with together was for the Cascade is a 2016
Rising. Cascadia Rising.
Yeah, so for Cascadia Rising, for instance, we came up with the idea of because we were trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we get fuel? How do we get water? How do we get those basic necessities that the Guard needs to save people and to provide those life-preserving kind of capabilities in a catastrophic event? And, okay, so fuel was one of the big ones. It was the biggest one. And so we thought, well, we have KC-135s or access to, right? So, but they're in the Air Guard. Right? Air Guard and Army Guard don't necessarily always play well together, and more importantly, we're not necessarily interoperable, right? Yeah. So when it comes to any sort of exercise or domestic operation or any sort of joint kind of exercise, it's, can you work together, and how does that happen? So we came up with the idea, and I've said that 3 times now, to download fuel off of a KC-135 airframe that would, hypothetically fly half full from Fairchild Air Force Base to McChord, where it would then be downloaded. That fuel would be downloaded into an Army HEMTT fueler, and then allow for refuel capability to helicopters to fly out to the peninsula to pick up, children that are, standing on the roof of their elementary buildings. So
and the exercise worked.
And it worked. It turned into this series of like, hey, how do we do this? How can we make this happen? There were some other less sexy exercises such as the gravity defuel of the towers at McCord. So they have these huge towers for fuel reserves on McCord Airfield, and they have civilians that had never worked on the weekends before. So the second year it turned into, hey, how do we do that? Like, how do we get to yes? Like, because in the Army National Guard, you can.
Ooh, dropping the recruiting bit there. But I mean, so you're bringing up a point, right? Where if Pete Hudspeth was here, he would probably go in great detail on these exercises, because I remember being part of these exercises and covering these things, and we all kind of said the same thing, right? You're going to take a KC-135 and you're going to offload fuel into a like, we all thought this could work, and it does work. And
it does.
I think you guys proved it. But this goes back to, and it's all part of logistics, right? I mean, Pete Hudspeth will sit here and say that he learned everything from Chief Mariano.
That's true.
She
Legend.
would have sat here and said she learned all of it from somebody else. And it's all that knowledge that you guys have all passed along throughout the years that I think is so valuable to the Guard.
I think so too.
So not just you, Heidi, but I wanted to make sure we really hit on logistics, because I think I've always known you as a logistician, and I know you're an aviator as well, but I've always known you in your roles as a logistician. So, and I think that's something I think we like to brag about a little bit. So now you're in the G4. You're kind of the go-to, I feel. I call you the go-to because I think I always end up calling you on a lot of questions I have for logistics stuff. But what are those big things you guys are focusing on now in the G4 office?
I think that there is the primary focus really is always readiness, is being ready when needed, right? And making sure that our soldiers are equipped, that maintenance is performed, and that any mobilization effort is supported 100%. Yeah. So I think that overall that's the primary focus of the G4, and that's also for state as well as for federal missions, right? So because there's always the rules that you have to know about in order to effectively plan and support the force. Yeah.
So you haven't always been full-time Guard. You guys started a business, Pino's Palette. Can you kind of talk about starting a business and what you guys do there?
That's crazy. Yeah, let's talk about that. So, one of the other great things about the being in the Guard in Washington State is not only do you get your federal benefits, but you also have state benefits. So my second degree that I got was in business. My husband was like, hey, I've got this great idea. We're going to go get a business degree. Like, oh, that's amazing. Let's go get a business degree. Yes! So we're very excited.
So we blame Ray for starting this idea.
No, maybe. No, it was very much a joint venture, but it started with, exercising our education benefits again that we received from the state. So the state paid 75% of our MBA. And so after we were done with that in 2014, a year later, we were looking for those options because at that point, again, it was like, okay, well, what's next? What's my why? Where do we go in 3 to 5 years? Like, what's our plan? And so it was a good idea, really, basically. Yeah. It was a good idea. So we actually were on a date night at Pino's Palette. So Pinot like the grape and Palette like the artist palette. And it was our first date, in 6 months after our first baby. So that's intense. No pressure there. Ugh. So, but there's a Pino's Palette. It is a franchise. So there's a Pino's Palette, small business owner, Jackie Casey, in Spokane. So we went on our first date night, and they were sold out for months. Like, it took a long time for us to actually get into a class for this paint and sip, right? So this paint and sip studio. So we went, and we painted, we drank, and we had fun, and drank. We painted, we drank, and we had fun. And so we looked at each other and said, well, what do you think that this would do on the other side? Like, it seems like it is doable. Like, why wouldn't we do this and do the Guard and have small children and live on both sides of the states? Why wouldn't we do all of those things?
Yeah, why not?
Because why not? It's a great idea. So we did. It was because it was a good idea. Yeah. And so that kind of led to other opportunities. But the Pino's Palette, to me, it does also kind of serve this purpose. It fills a gap, I think. So I think that Pinot's Palette is about connecting with others. It's about building shared experiences. It's about celebrating, right? So all of those things that are positive in the world, and it's empowering, right? Mm-hmm. So the mission is to bring art to the masses in a fun and entertaining way with extraordinary customer service. Like, what about that? Doesn't sound like that's something that you want to be part of, right? Yeah. So art to me, and really Pinot's Palette is the only thing that makes my life make any sort of sense, right? Because I have an art degree. I'm a pilot, have leadership experience as an officer, and I have a business degree. So somehow all of those came together and be like, oh, my life makes sense now. This is what I was made for.
Yeah. So how many people do you guys employ?
So 13. We are down to 13. We have 2 locations. So we have our first studio location was in Puyallup, in the South Hill, and we're celebrating 7 years in business in December. And then our second location is in Federal Way, and we are going to be celebrating 4 years in business at that location. We opened our second location just before COVID, so yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah. So
probably like February of 2020.
We were just starting. Our first sold out class actually was on Valentine's Day, February 14th in 2020. And then the very next month we were shut down. But strangely enough, that got me kind of back into the Guard, because then I was able to work with a friend of mine that I had met at during the Homeland Response Force tour that I had performed. And so I went and I helped Major, now Lieutenant Colonel Jim Hopkins. Yep. So he was the officer in charge of the vaccination, the COVID testing and vaccination team that was working directly with the Department of Health for the emergency response for that. And he was just working way too hard. Like, he was working literally 7 days a week. So he had that. He had a couple other things going on. And I was like, Jim, you are you're wow. Yeah. Like, you don't look so good, dude. Let me help you. So I was able to come and help, and I was the deputy OIC, and then later closed out that task force as the OIC for Task Force Dragon under Joint Task Force Steelhead. So, I mean, that was a really great experience. And it would never have happened if my businesses weren't closed for COVID. Yeah. So it's just this very interesting, okay, this door is closed. Like, this, I've closed this door, whoever is, the door is closed. Like, how do you crawl through the window? How do you get to yes? How do you grow and overcome? And I hate this word because it's the COVID word. It's how do you pivot? How do you pivot, right, in order to continue moving forward in a positive and productive way?
Yeah. So there's kind of a common theme, it feels like, is just overcoming obstacles, and kind of, I don't want to use pivot as well, but it does, like,
I know, right?
It's taking on those challenges that come your way. And so I feel like that's the message you're kind of sharing with the audience. So say there's a young guardsman there who they're interested in being a business owner. They're interested in moving up through their career. They're just interested in growing, right? Like, as guardsmen, there's always that need and desire for that mentorship. Yeah. What would you tell that young individual?
So I would say it's really important to know what you want, and to really be in touch with your why, and to be true to that, first off. Second off, I would definitely make sure that you are satisfied with your service. And I think part of that is knowing what your benefits are as a guardsman, and taking advantage of those. Always knowing what those are and taking advantage of those. And looking to see across the formation examples for both those traits and values and those kind of qualities that you'd like to emulate, and also those that you'd like to avoid, right? Because we are part of the 1%, and we're still a cross-section of the American populace, and it takes all types, right? Yep. So you're going to see the best and you're going to see like the not so best. So taking those examples as a soldier, as a young person, as somebody who is looking for what the next thing is, and just grabbing onto it when you see something or you find that person that you connect with or that you feel is really value added, or that can take you to the next level, right? Because you go into the military and you can be initially successful on your merit and your fitness, right? Fitness is non-negotiable, merit and fitness. But you will not be successful long-term on just merit and fitness. You must find a mentor. And it might not be a traditional mentor, right? Yep. So I was like I said, some of my mentors, some of the best advice that I've received is from some very strong and powerful female NCOs, right? But taking that and then find an advocate, yep. Right? Because this is not a sprint. This is not a sprint. This is a long haul. This is a marathon. Yeah. It doesn't have to be, right? And sometimes, when you find that kind of perfect connection of opportunity and you're fulfilling your why and you're feeling fulfilled with your service, then everything else just kind of falls into place, and it's 25 years later.
Yeah.
And it didn't really necessarily feel like a marathon, right? And at the end, you get a pretty decent retirement for it.
Yeah.
For a part-time job.
Exactly, for a part-time job.
So that's crazy.
No, I appreciate your insight. I was able to be at your promotion ceremony. My wife and I both attended. Really, I think to scout what you were going to do, knowing that my packet is probably moving that way as well.
I'm
eventually.
So happy you guys were able to come.
And you kind of shared this message, and I just thought it was so positively uplifting, and somebody I deeply respect. My mentor, Angie Gentry, one of my 4 mentors that I always look at and I say, I want to be exactly like that person in their career, said, her story is phenomenal, and she would be somebody I think you should interview. And I said, well, that's easy because Heidi is a friend. She's easy to talk to on this stuff. So I'm glad we were able to have you on here. And I'm glad you could share that message. Is there anything else you want to share before we kind of wrap up?
No, I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to talk with you and to share, I guess, my story.
Yeah. No, we appreciate you coming on. If you like the video, make sure to give it a like. If you want to learn more about Lieutenant Colonel Leonard's story, I'm pretty sure she'd be happy to share that. You can put your information in the notes. As well as if you have any comments. And thanks for joining us. Hey, thanks for coming out.
Thanks.